Evaluate each expression. In exercise A, we have the cube root of 8. Alright, so notice that this is different. In all the examples we've had before, we had something that just looked like, say, this. This was a square root. Now, it's understood, though rarely written, that there's a number 2 in what's called the index in that expression. And so, when finding the square root of 64, we were thinking, what number squared was 64? And we said, okay, well, that must be 8, because 8 squared is 64. But now we have the cube root of 8. And so now we want to think, what number cubed is 8? Right? So the thought here is, what number cubed is 8? Well, that number is 2. And so then the cube root of 8 is 2. The opposite of the cube root of 64. Alright, so again, we can think of this as negative 1 times the cube root of 64. Now, again, what's my thought? Is there a number cubed that yields 64? And so I run through some numbers and I remember that 4 times 4 is 16 and 16 times 4 is 64. So 4 cubed is 64. So then I have the cube root of 64 is 4. So I now have negative 1 times 4, which is negative 4. The cube root of negative 1. Now I might stop and say, oh, well, that's not real because there's a negative under the radical. But wait a second, this is a cube root, not a square root. And if we think about this, we say, here's my thought. Is there a number that I can raise to the third power and get a negative 1? And the answer is yes, there is. And in fact, that number is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. If we move from left to right, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1 times negative 1 is in fact negative 1. So what this tells me is the cube root of negative 1 is negative 1. D. The opposite of the cube root of negative 8. Alright, so again, I can think of this as negative 1 times the cube root of negative 8. And again, what's my thought process here now is there a number that I can raise to the third power and get negative 8? And yes, there is. That number is negative 2. So now I have negative 1 times the cube root of negative 8 is negative 2, which is positive 2. So we can have negatives under cube roots in the real number system, but not under square roots for the real number system.